Every film on the
Yeah, I think
Jackson.
Jackson sent the mail.
Steve, do you want to just let me know when to start? Are we ready? Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Andrew Christian with Denver Action Free Assange. And I want to welcome everybody here today and thank you for coming. We are very honored to be hosting John and Gabriel Shipton, Julian Assange's father and brother, here in Denver today. We're here at the Denver Press Club, which is actually the oldest press club in the country. And I think it's a really fitting venue, and we want to extend a big thank you to them for opening early so that we could have this today and have it fit with our schedule. These guys are on quite a busy schedule. We are the 11th city in their US tour. And before I turn it over to them, I just want to say a little bit about our group and then also read something as to why we're all here today. So our group started June 1st was our first rally, so shortly after Julian Assange's arrest, and we are a grassroots local group, and we work to raise awareness about the case of Julian Assange and how it affects our free press, and ultimately to encourage others to join us and act with us to end the indictment. So I want to read something. Recently, over 24 major human rights and free press organizations came out with a statement about this case, and I want to read it because they say it much better than I do, but that's why we're here. The indictment of Mr. Assange threatens press freedom because much of the conduct described in the indictment is conduct that journalists engage in routinely, and that they must engage in order to do the work the public needs them to do. Journalists in major news publications regularly speak with sources, ask for clarification or more documentation, and receive and publish documents the government considers secret. In our view, such a precedent in this case could effectively criminalize these common journalistic practices. So we're in a pretty heavy situation here. We stand to lose our right to know the truth, especially about some of the most important things to know the truth about, war crimes, and that's what this is about. So I would like to not take up too much more time because I would much rather hear. Did you hear any of that? Okay, take it from the top. All right. Welcome everybody today. My name is Sandra Christian with Denver Action to Free Assange. And we are glad to welcome everybody here, especially the two guests sitting next to me. We are honored to have John and Gabriel Shipton, the father and brother of Julian Assange. We are welcoming them in Denver, and this is their 11th stop on their tour in the US, the Home Run for Julian tour. And so a little bit about Denver Action to Free Assange. We are a local grassroots group. We are nonpartisan, and we work to raise awareness about the case of Julian Assange and how that affects our press freedom. And we hope that by doing so, we encourage others to join us and act to end the indictment. So we are here in the Denver Press Club. A big thank you to them for letting us use the venue today. They opened early so that we could fit it in with our schedule because right after this, we have a rally at the Capitol. I want to read something that came out recently from over 24 human rights and free press organizations. And this is a statement about the case of Julian Assange and why it needs to end. The indictment of Mr. Assange threatens press freedom because much of the conduct described in the indictment is conduct that journalists engage in routinely,
and that they must engage in order to do the work the public needs them to do. Journalists at major news publications regularly speak with sources, ask for clarification or more documentation, and receive and publish documents the government considers secret. In our view, such a precedent in this case could effectively criminalize these common journalistic practices. So our group definitely agrees with this, and that's why this is a local issue, this is a national issue, this is a global issue. Julian Assange is a foreign journalist. So there are many precedents that are being set here, and for a small group like ours, it means so much to have any and all members of the media who are here today. Thank you again for coming, and without further ado, I will turn it over to Gabriel.
Thank you. Thanks to everyone who's come out today. Quite a historic place. We had a little tour before. There's signed pictures of all the presidents on the wall opposite me, which is a bit surreal. And hello to everyone at home on the stream as well. Thanks for joining in. So I'll just, I usually start with an update on where Julian's case is at. Beginning of January, he won his case in the UK. The UK judge found that an extradition to the US would be tantamount to a sentence to death. That the conditions here were so oppressive that there was a high likelihood that Julian would commit suicide. The US DOJ immediately appealed that decision, and a few days later, Julian's bail application was rejected. So he was sent back to Belmarsh Prison, which is a maximum security prison on the outskirts of London, where he has been he's in his third year of imprisonment there, but it's been 6 months since he's won his extradition case. So that's 6 months where he's been, in this kind of limbo, waiting to hear whether an appeal will happen or not. One thing that just happened this morning or yesterday is in a Spanish court, John McAfee, who's the software tycoon, I guess, or he used to have McAfee antivirus. He was being extradited from Spain to the US, I think on some tax evasion charges or something like that. But the High Court just approved the High Court in Spain approved his extradition, and rather than coming to the US or continuing on, he was found dead in his cell, and I think it's likely that he suicided himself. So this is it's a very real thing that rather than face the oppressive conditions here in the US, people who are being extradited are committing suicide. So the judge's ruling needs to be upheld in the UK, because this could happen to Julian, and it just all has to stop, basically. What else can I tell you about Julian's? So Kendra read out the letter from the 24 human rights and press freedom organizations. So that includes all the biggest ones in the US. That's Amnesty International, Press Freedom Foundation, ACLU, Human Rights Watch, all these huge organizations here who all see that this case is a real problem for press freedom in this country. And also another point is that executive editors of Washington Post, New York Times have both expressed their concern about the press freedom implications of this case. and the use of the Espionage Act against the publisher, which is the first time. It's never been used in this way before. And what does that mean when executive editors are expressing their concern? To me, I think it means that they are, when a story comes across their desk, a national security story, they have to consider whether they or their journalists will be prosecuted under the Espionage Act for publishing the story. So this prosecution is already having a silencing effect on national security journalism. And this has a flow-on effect as well. So the flow-on effect goes on to leakers. So people who leak documents, or insiders who reveal revelations about corruption or lies or war crimes, that we don't know about, that are being committed by those in power, will all be thinking twice before they take them to a media institution, because now they know that these media institutions aren't publishing things because they're worried about an Espionage Act prosecution. So there's this sort of double silencing effect that this is having. Another effect that this prosecution is having, and can be seen around the world, the prosecution is giving license to totalitarian and authoritarian regimes to persecute their journalists, even murdering their journalists. You saw, the case of Jamal Khashoggi, who was a Washington Post reporter who was murdered in the Turkish embassy. It's very similar to Julian's case in that, the government was able to pursue him and just, do whatever they liked to him, carte blanche. And there was sort of no repercussions. So we're seeing that in Julian's case as well. Also, we see foreign leaders of these sort of authoritarian states, when questioned about their track record on press freedoms, they bring up Julian's case. One example is Aliyev, the Azerbaijani leader, when confronted about his treatment of journalists. I mean, he's got this shocking record. Imprisons, tortures journalists. Press freedoms in his country are, they're non-existent. But when he was confronted by a BBC interviewer, he was able to say, well, who are you to lecture me? Look what you're doing to Julian Assange. Just outside of London, you're holding, a publisher who's broken thousands of stories, won awards all over the world. Who are you to lecture me on press freedoms? The Chinese Foreign Affairs spokesperson, when confronted about their human rights record and their record on press freedoms, they brought up Assange in a press conference. So this is a problem that the US State Department is facing all over the world. The UK, another example, UK Russian ambassador was confronted about Navalny and Russia's treatment of Navalny. And he said, well, just down the road, you have Assange in prison. So this isn't just a problem here in the US. There are people all over the world who have much less rights than we do in Australia or even here in the US, whose journalists are being prosecuted and whose governments are holding up Assange's prosecution as an excuse, basically, to continue the mistreatment of their journalists and the silencing of their journalists. So it's, so important that, not only will the dropping of this prosecution be an upholding of your First Amendment rights here in the US, but it'll be a signal to everyone around the world that the Biden administration is very serious about press freedoms around the world in these authoritarian countries, as well as at home. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gabriel, and I will turn it over to John.
Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming. It's most kind. Just a couple of things. First of all, some newsworthy items other than John McAfee's suicide in a Spanish jail on threat of extradition, an IT technician. Similarly, Meng Wanzhou, the Huawei CEO is under threat of extradition to the United States. Mike Lynch is another IT expert in the United Kingdom, is under threat of extradition to the United States. Ola Bini, another IT technician or genius, if you like, is under threat of extradition to the United States. The judicial harvesting of talent around the world and the threat to anybody who places themselves in some contention. So, for example, with Washington, for example, Meng Wanzhou in 5G, they have technical capacities that the United States doesn't have. This has been a common occurrence in the buying up of all of the very high points of French technology by it's a big place, by the United States, and stripping out the intellectual product. This week, a British destroyer in the Black Sea crossed the maritime border of Russia and was bombed. Bombs were dropped nearby by an Su-27. A Russian destroyer fired a shot over its bow. The US Karan was rammed by a Russian destroyer in the Black Sea just the day before yesterday. Last week in Geneva, the Biden administration made agreements to strategic stability. Now, the fundamental thing in this is that we might be seeing a pattern forming where the United Kingdom disciplines in its way, or influences, if you wish, influences the United States by this rash behaviour. Equally, we might be seeing that certain parts of the United States in the Pentagon, certain parts, let's just say of Washington, certain parts of Washington don't want to return to strategic stability, and so they do acts that make things unstable. The only way we can find out about this is having a decent press, vigorous intellects in the press, and fundamentally the understanding always in our hearts and heads that freedom only comes through knowledge. So we may be seeing, that the United States itself in Washington is becoming ungovernable. They can't govern. They turn the weapons of the Department of Justice against certain sections of the society by saying domestic terrorism. They haven't done that when the domestic riots suit them. So you have a division of the United States into two contending parts. I think the shorthand is the red states and the blue states, but that is really not so helpful. It's better to know the ideologies being pursued and the depth, so the deep cultures that still run from prior to the Civil War in the South. It's better to know those. And that would require a decent, active, powerful press. It's better to know what motivates the north of the country and its disciplines to have finance as the single organising element, it's better to know that. And it's better in preservation of the decency of the society to have a Congress which can weld those two disparate streams of being together. And that's way out of my depth. That's the United States. You know, I'm a visitor here, but I see these things. Forgive me for making that comment. The next is despair. It seems to me that states are in a state of despair. You know, after the war, which was pretty horrendous, you know, that all of the people of the world contemplated what to do and came up with the United Nations. It wasn't a top-down phenomenon. It wasn't a rainmaker, you know. It was a bottom-up phenomenon that the creation of the United States, the United Nations, the first president was an Australian, Herbert Bear Evatt, a vigorous, powerful intellect who was able to give substance to the smaller states in the structure of the United Nations. Through the United Nations, contending states can put their interests and negotiate that interest without reverting to war, but staying within the diplomatic codes and the laws of the United Nations. Again, we have the Conventions of Asylum. In 1973, in Santiago, there were 10,000 people in missions in Santiago seeking asylum. In 1973, Australia introduced the ratification in the General Assembly of the Conventions of Asylum, and they were adopted by a huge majority, well over 100. They were abandoned in the treatment of Julian Assange. Also, the United Nations have rapporteurs. I think from memory there are 7. In particular, I mentioned Professor Niels Melzer of Glasgow University, the United Nations rapporteur on torture, made a report 36 pages long with the assistance of 2 specialists in torture on Julian in Belmarsh prison, and came to the firm conclusion that Julian was a victim of psychological torture over a number of years, consisting of robbing, smearing, failure of due process, procedure irregularities, and conspiracy between states, that is Sweden, the Swedish Prosecuting Authority, and the Crown Prosecuting Service. That's an element of despair. When you can't negotiate something and you get the hammer out and bash your neighbour's foot or something, it's despair. There's no other way. So you despair and turn to violence and harden the heart and then collapse into guilt after, or you become inured to guilt. And as a consequence, a hardened psyche can no longer relate to the events of your community. So you watch a bit too much TV, have a couple of extra beers, and get overweight and become gross because it have to get some satisfaction here. Those psychological formations are really well known. The sociological formations are really well known. For example, because we like individualism in the United States and my country, Australia, and elsewhere, we say that phenomenon emerges from the individual. So in Australia, we say he's effing nuts. You know. In the United States, I would say, mad as a hatter or whatever. This is a failure of understanding that the phenomenon is sociological and it exists in a class. Mr. Rumsfeld is a cruel, vicious, scheming man, not because he's cruel, vicious and scheming, because he wouldn't be in the circumstance that he is if he wasn't. The organism doesn't accept anybody other than that. The Pentagon is a living organism, and so is the Congress. And it sifts and trains those that are in there. People like me, we wouldn't get a job, you know, they'd have me sweeping the floor. My brother might get work there, he can be cruel. So I just want to sort of round it out by saying that without that First Amendment, that fleck of gold that you guys got, that we all envy, without that, you're gone. Because those circumstances that I described, where organisms, that is the Pentagon and its associated bodies, create the circumstances for their thriving, that is building guns and shooting people, but it can never be examined. So what can only happen is that, and this is a terrible thing, flux of life will not permit a Death Star. The flux of life itself will overrule, in one way or the other, the ideology of the Pentagon will decline, and it won't be pretty. I say this because in Brown University's study revealed to us that 37 million people are refugees in the Middle East. 37 million, that's mums and dads and kids seeking refuge and asylum around the place. 37 million. Gideon Collier, an excess death expert in Melbourne University, calculates, and these are narrow, these are narrow calculations, and they're interesting because you can open them up and have a look inside. He calculates that there's between 6 and 7 million excess deaths in the 20-year period that the Pentagon and Washington have destroyed in whole or in part 7 nations. Now, when I say the great Oliver Stone, the other day I listened to his address to the Writers Guild, where he said it had over 30 years, 11 nations have been destroyed, and it's cost $14 trillion. So when you look at the excess deaths that is a result of that activity of the Pentagon, you look to the other side. What has happened where they took the money from in order to do that? OxyContin, homelessness, declining longevity of people in the United States, particularly in the southern states. That's the other thing. You can open them up and have a look. And with a decent, vigorous press and a powerful intellect and an understanding, the growth in the community grows, you know, it just grows up because the flow of information is there. That can be righted, and we can understand that we can build another institution to defend us. And it doesn't have to be it doesn't have to be an outlandish, domineering 800 bases around the world, spending all of the excess money of the people of the United States on its latest fantasy. It doesn't have to be that. And that can be accommodated and done by that beautiful thing, the First Amendment. Thanks. I'm sorry I'm a little bit.
Thank you both. We'd like to open it up. That was really amazing. I'm sorry, I'm a little taken aback. So grateful to have John and Gabriel here. We'd like to open it up for questions and Q&A session. Does anybody in the audience have any questions for John or Gabriel or about the case?
Yeah, I do. I would be curious to hear your thoughts and feelings about how being from Australia, touring the United States on First Amendment issues, to saving your brother and son. I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
Say again.
Yeah. How does it feel being from Australia, right, touring the U.S., right, saving your son and your brother? I'd like to know how your feelings and thoughts.
I'll just ask in two parts, Gabriel and I. Is that okay?
Yes. So just real quick, in case people couldn't hear, the question is, how do John and Gabriel feel, as Australians touring the U.S. and here to save their brother and their son?
Thanks. Well, first of all, the irony isn't lost on us that, we're two Australians talking about, Americans' rights, First Amendment rights and free press rights all around the country. I think, it's been it's been an amazing trip so far. We've seen, outpouring of support wherever we've gone. Lots and lots of more press. An article upon every day. There's an article coming out about Julian's case in the US now, when we didn't see any of that before, and it's all focused on what his case means for press freedoms and First Amendment. So that's I think that's really just so grateful, I guess, that people are responding to what we're saying. Another part of it is that there's a Chinese dissident artist, Ai Weiwei, who's a good friend of Julian's, and outside the court outside the Old Bailey, Ai Weiwei said, it's the fight that gives the meaning, and so. What that means is that, all of Julian's work, it's this process now that really gives it meaning. That this fight that Julian's taking on in the courts and everything that is happening to him just shows, what his work actually means and the implication it has around the world to structural power. And those people who want to keep things from us. Thank you, John.
Thank you. This another irony. I feel rude because I'm a guest and I'm hosted really well. People treat me well and give me their houses to live in and have dinner with me and Gabrielle. So I feel a bit sort of churlish, really. But you crack on. The other part of the question is a bit harder to answer because it concerns feelings, and feelings sort of wander around the place. Your feelings, all over the place, and I don't much like talking about what I feel. I just move right along and don't use hope as a tool. I just tackle what comes before me in the best of my capacity at the moment that it comes before me. The rest of it is quite beautiful, really. Looking at your faces, and it's who could complain? Who couldn't? So I do feel a little churlish. because I'm hosted impeccably, but we crack on.
Well, I don't think you should feel churlish at all. I think your remarks have been very circumscribed and well informed and certainly well taken by me. And I obviously, as you're saying, reading people's expressions I think by the group generally. So I have to stand up. My goodness.
Sorry.
So no, I don't think you should feel that way at all. Very, very delightful to hear you. We are people here in this country who admire Julian Assange enormously. He would be the sort of person who, in classical culture, would be really what would be called a hero, not in the sort of Rice Krispies, whatever cereal sense, but in the sense of semi-divinity, really, someone who has shown extraordinary moral capacity, just really beyond anything imaginable for a young man, really of his age, the sacrifice that he's made, which will remain. And I hope there'll still be a history after this. I don't know, but there's no reason to suppose there will be. But should there be, he will figure prominently in it. And interestingly, here in Denver, we have two such, not quantitatively, but qualitatively. One hasn't been going at it as long and has not sacrificed as much, sacrificed quite a bit, is Andy Ngo, who's had his brains bashed in and is, I don't think he's out of his 20s, is he? For his exercise of freedom of speech. And he was here in town, actually, under heavy guard a couple of nights ago, amid complete silence from the media. No mention, not a word about him. And promises to probably be, he's not going to stop doing the reporting that he's doing. He's as determined a journalist as Julian. And it takes years before his sacrifice matches Julian's, but there we have two examples of extraordinary people who push that frontier really with as anybody that's got a classical bone in his body sees that border into divinity. Yeah. So thank you for your remarks here, and please don't feel any possibility of any sense that anything you're saying is not being well taken. We're highly honored to have you here. Highly, really, really, and thank you so much for your remarks.
Okay, do we have any other questions or yes? Mhm.
Just please speak in.
I'd just like to know, with the audience here, it's rhetorical, and just a show of hands. Anybody here from ABC, CBS, NBC, CNN, or MSNBC, or Fox? No hands. Okay.
I don't think there's anybody here from Westward or anything.
My friend here, Irene, and I are from the Nation Report. Formerly, we were volunteers at KGNU Radio. They have gone pretty far, is my opinion, to the right. So they don't have anyone representing us here. Oh, there you are. Wow. I am shocked. Cool. Well, I hope you get a good report. Anyway, but so in your travels so far, have you seen in like press clubs like this, media that are broadcast media, that are, national media or more local? And can you talk about that a little bit? Hold the microphone about 4 inches from your mouth. With a very good voice.
Gabrielle's expert on that. Well, more expert.
Yeah, so I think it's interesting that we've seen people from sort of more libertarian right as well as the left. So it's very interesting phenomena that we can do. Amy Goodman on Democracy Now! Is very supportive and will have us on her show. And then, a few days later, Tucker Carlson, who is very supportive, will have us on his show. So there is some unity on the First Amendment implications of this prosecution and the freedom of press. The damage to the press that this is doing, and it's from those two areas. And the centre. The centre is we're slowly getting a few from the centre, but that's where all the work has to be done, I think, and the pressure from those two areas on the centre is really that's what's so impressive, I guess, is the left and the libertarian right who are coming together, and they can pressure the centre to do more reporting and more media. That's our sort of, would be like a strategy, I guess. Yeah.
I just add only and make firmer that the concern of the First Amendment and our being here seems to overarch the ideological differences that Amy Goodman has and Carl Tucker had. Tucker Carlson. So it overarches, and that is a sign of health, I reckon.
Okay. Well, I'm a rapper, so when I get called out, they're shouting for us. You gotta stand up, say something. And to present a non-right-leaning question, a very human question. Did Julian give any indications in his childhood, young adulthood, that he would evolve and emerge to be such an important figure? Can you share with us any family anecdotes that kind of may have shown who Julian might become in the future?
Well, this is, I can only make this amusing. I can't answer it seriously, but I could never win an argument. There you go.
So there we go. Okay, so we still have a few more minutes if anybody else has any more questions. All right, Wayne?
I just wondering when you last visited with him and how he's doing.
I saw Julian when I was in the UK in October last year, so October 2020. I think over the years, it's sort of what's been happening to him is he's very resilient. He's very strong. person, but this pressure that's been put on him is crushing. And I wouldn't say that to him, but when you see him, you can tell there's a difference, in his manner and the way he speaks. But he's holding out, and I think, when I saw him in October, he didn't have a visit for 8 months. The prison locked down for 8 months because of COVID. And then he had his first, some good news is he had his first visit with his family again just a few days ago. So, that really lifts his spirits up. And I know he's allowed phone calls, and he speaks to John, and John updates him on all the things that we're doing here in the US, and that lifts his spirits as well. Also, all the sort of, because he was in the embassy and a lot of people used to visit him. So all the visitors that we're running into now over here, Colleen Rowley, who we saw in Minneapolis, she said to say hello, and we can pass that along. So it's these connections with the outside world and the support that's out here that keep him going. These actions, like here today and later at the Capitol building, they just, they add up, and it's these little things that, keep him going day to day. Obviously today it's a bit distressing to see what happened to John McAfee, and you worry that, that could happen to Julian too. But, I think if we keep going and we keep doing this sort of stuff and fighting for him, then we hope that he can keep going inside as well.
Thank you.
All right, Irene. You may have talked about this. I'm sorry I was late, so if you did, please skip it. But I'd like to know about your communication with the Biden administration and what that has involved.
Because it's a comedy show now.
Good point. Well, it's a serious matter, so we have a friend in the human rights section of the, a friend in inverted commas, in the human rights section of the Biden administration. We were here in January, before inauguration. We wrote a letter, and they said they haven't had time to see us. Come back after inauguration. So we waited a little bit, and then they said, oh, they were just simply too busy, which of course, they are. Since then, I've worked through the strategy and tactics with Gabrielle and Julian and some people who do that sort of thing. And I think the best thing is to keep away from parliamentarians or congressmen in the United States, because approaching them, for our thing, they have to take a position. Once they take a position, you've got to talk them back down for it, because they'll take the common, secure position. They'll take it every time. So keep away so you don't have to talk them back down. So what we do is we work through NGOs, which there are many, lobbyists, they're NGOs, of course, and through the staff of congressmen, because the staff bring the information, the consequence formulate the opinions of the congressman. That's no insult to congressmen, by the way. That's what the staff are there for. So is that an answer? That's the technique. See the staff, bring forth the upwelling of support amongst ordinary people, because there's not going to be any rainmakers for this matter. or any other matter for that. There's a professor at, I think it's Duke University, DUQUE, we went to the other day and had a chat to. He puts every season when he starts with the new students, he puts $100 up on them. Said, if anybody can have that, who produces for me one of the great advances in civil administration in the United States that came from the top. He's never lost $100 ever. Always upwells from us. That's what happened in Australia. We started off 3 years ago, myself and a barrister friend, and I had to sort of like talk him into it and beg him, wandering around Parliament House. We were able to speak to 2 people. Now, there's 227 members of the Australian Parliament. Now, about 13 to 15% are actual group members of the Assange group, which is a parliamentary body, and there are several hangers-on. The Deputy Prime Minister of Australia is one of the group. Now, that only came about because the parliamentarians, or Congress people, listen to the concerns of their constituencies and bring those constituencies into the sovereign majesty of Parliament and insist that the executive adjust policy to suit the Parliament, what the Parliament wishes. Of course, every institution of state envies the sovereign majesty of Parliament, so they grab it in this way and that way and have national security. This leads to another point. So that's that, okay? There's a clear and a comprehensive and sensible paragraph. It leads to another point. Is with the WikiLeaks and Chelsea Manning's alleged releases, revelations, and several others, their names I can't bring to mind straight away. With that, any person with a computer can go online and become as informed as the staffers that advise the congressman. You can be informed. Us. That's an impossible circumstance 10 years ago. You would have had to join an institution and learn to sneeze as you worked your way through book dust. You used to see the scholars in the libraries with their handkerchiefs, because but now you can become as informed, and we can gather in groups and present irrefutable, logical arguments to our Congress people or other sections of society that administer our resources for us. Easy peasy. It's a great thing. PubMed, if you want to look at COVID, and or PubMed also on vaccines. If you want to know, it's there. You can become as informed as a medical administrator. Just one thing. Of course, I'm making it sound easy. I'm describing a phenomenon. It's there. But of course, it takes a bit of work and you have to sit up late and so on.
Thank you so much. So I know we might have a couple more questions, but it is time for us to end this part of our day with the Shiftons, because we have to get them over to the Capitol for a rally to do exactly what John was talking about. We're gathering with people to make some noise for our free press. And we hope to see everybody there. We hope to get some coverage. We really hope that everybody learned a lot. Too much hope there, but we know that everybody learned a lot today, and thank you for joining us, and we look forward to the connections made. Thank you again to John and Gabriel. We are so honored to have you here. We appreciate hearing from you today, and thank you again.
Kendra, thank you for